Hey friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new 9 Lives stamp set from Hello Bluebird. I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some Distress Oxide inks. So these are the 3 shades that I'm going to be using on the card later on. So I'm going to choose my Copic colors to match those. First though, I am going to tackle all of the neutral shades for these 3 adorable kittens and the little mouse. So for this first cat on the left, I am just starting with a base coat of some creamy shades using E40 and E41 and then letting that fade into the white. So just a little bit of that E41 first, blending out with the E40 and then leaving that plain white cardstock for the highlight. And I'm going to come back and add some more details to him later on. But now I'm going to move on to the second kitty, and I wanted it to be a black cat. I used to have a black cat and I really just love them. So I went with some neutral grays. I'm using N3, N5, and N7. The N7 is going to be my darkest because I don't want him to get so dark that you can't see his features anymore. So I do want to stay in the more like charcoal gray range and not like a true black. So I started with that N7, like I said, placed those shadows in on the outside edge of his face. His face is completely turned toward us, the viewer, so I did his shadows equally, but his body is shifted toward the left, so I'm putting his shadows mainly down the right side of his body and then a little bit on the front of his hindquarters there, blending that N7 out with the N5. And then I'm going to use the N3 in the center of his face where his eyes are and his little nose and mouth so that you can really make those out and they don't get lost. If those features kind of disappear too much, then it's hard to see their adorable personality. So I want to make sure that you can really make that out. However, the blend was not as good as I would like, so I am going to go in with a second layer on this one to help smooth that out. So actually the other day I came outside, I journal every morning out on the deck, and we had been having a lot of rain, so I always cover up the couch at night. So I went out to uncover the couch in the morning, and when I pulled back the cover, there were 2 little kittens curled up underneath. They must have like taken shelter from the rain. There was a solid black one and then a little white with gray and black patches. So these first 2 kittens that I'm coloring are going to kind of be inspired by them. Unfortunately, they did run off before I was able to even do anything, but it was a super cute little moment to kind of discover them under my couch cover. So I'm moving on to my third cat, and I'm switching to some warm grays. Again, I'm going to come back and add some detail to him later on, but to start, I'm using W00, W1, and W3. Using that W3 as the darkest to lay in some shadow and some depth, then blending out with the W1 and then softening that with the W00. And once again, I will also leave a few little white places. I wanted kind of the chest and the feet and the belly to be a little bit more white. Next up, I'm going to do the mouse, and I wanted each of these critters to kind of have their own shade, so I'm going to use some E70s along with a W00. I'm using E70 and E71, starting with that E71 and adding a little shadow down the right side of his face since he's facing left, and then for the rest of his body I did it equal since that's kind of straight on. Blend it out with the E70 and then use the W00 for the lightest. And then while I have these shades out, I'm actually going to add some patches to my first kitten. So each of the critters will have their own look, but these little patches that I'm going to add to this one are going to tie in some of the rest of the critters. So I just started with that E71, blended out with the E70 and then the W00, and then I did a little tip to tip by picking up some of that E70 with the W00 to smooth out the blend since it is a larger area there. And then I did another patch on the opposite side on the lower hindquarters, and then I'm going to do a little bit on the base of the tail as well. And that W00 is just really going to help soften that into the rest of the coloring that I put down for the base coat. And then for his other patches, I'm going to use the same shades as I used on the black cat. So I'm going back to that N3, N5, and N7. So I'll do another patch over the other eye, being very sparing with that N7, that darkest shade, and making sure that the part that goes over the eye is that N3. And then I'll add a little spot on his forearm and another one on his other little leg and on his tail. So just picking and choosing little places. I don't really have a plan to it. I just kind of go in and add it wherever I think they should fit. That's kind of the fun of coloring cats or dogs or mice or bunnies. There's just so many different ways to color them, and it's really an opportunity to just play and see what looks good. I wanted those black and tan areas on the tail, or grayish shades, to kind of blend a little bit more. So I went back to that E70 and just went over that one more time. And then I went back in with a little extra of the N3. And then I'll use the N1 to transition into the white area after the black. And I did throw a little bit of that on the rest of the black patches for this little guy as well. For the other little cat, I'm going to do a tiger cat, so I'm coming in with W5 and adding some stripes on his forehead and also on his little arms, and I'll place them down his back as well. I kind of wish I had gone in with the W3 initially. I think the W5 was a little bit dark for what I was going for. So I am going to go back in with the W3 and just go directly over these little stripes to soften that up. I am going to also take those stripes up the tail. But yeah, I think it turned out pretty cute in the end, but if I had to do it again, I would have gone in with a little bit of a softer color. But like I said, I'm just going to grab that W3 and just go right over what I've already done, and that will help it fade just a little bit. Just soften that into the rest of the fur color, especially as it starts to dry back. And then I'm going to bring in RV11 and RV13 and give the black cat some rosy cheeks and color in his nose and also the insides of his ears. And my RV13 is always a little leaky, so I did pull off the other cap to just equalize the pressure in the barrel. For the other cats, since they are lighter, I'm actually going to start with the RV11 and then blend out with the RV10, and I will do that for the mouse as well. So just a little of that RV11 first on the cheeks and the ears, and then blending out with the RV10, which is super light, so that'll just help it fade into the fur, and then just the RV11 for the noses. So I'm going to finish up with that little mouse on the cheek that's turned away. I just used a little of the RV10. And then I'm going to keep these shades and add in RV14 to do the ribbon that is around the black cat's neck. And that is going to tie in really nicely with the picked raspberry Distress Oxide ink that I'll be using in just a little bit. I'll also color in the separate ball of yarn, putting that RV14 down toward the bottom, blending up with the RV13, and then filling in with the RV11. And then I'm going to switch to some aqua shades. I'm using BG11, BG13, and BG15, and these are going to tie in to the Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink. I'm going to do half of the ball of yarn that the kitty is holding, and then the head of the little fish toy. I wanted to have each of the Distress Oxide shades represented in at least 2 of the images. So to match the Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink, I'm going to use YG03, YG05, and YG07, and I'll do the other half of the ball of yarn that the cat is holding onto and the body of the little fish toy. And then to add a little bit of whimsy to that, I'm going to use YG17 to add some polka dots to the body. Then I'll take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that going off to the side. And I'm going to go over the eyes of all of my critters. This is an extra step, but it really does make their eyes nice and bright and shiny. It can really bring your critters to life, especially that black cat. It'll make the most impact on her because it just makes them so much more visible. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I'm taking another piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'm using the Hello Bluebird nesting circle dies to trim out 3 windows. So I've pulled out 3 of the dies and I'm going to arrange them on my card front, and I decided that the largest one was a little bit too large, so I needed to go down 1 size. That's the great thing about these nesting dies. You have so many different options. And I'm just going to arrange those until I'm happy with how they are spaced in relation to each other and how they're spaced in relation to the edges of the card. So I'm going to fiddle with them a little bit, and once I'm happy, I will take a little bit of Post-it tape and just tape them into place, and that's going to hold them steady while I run them through my die cutting machine and trim out those windows. And I'm placing the tape on the inside of the window that will be cut out just so it doesn't leave any marks behind. Sometimes the tape can kind of leave a little impression if your sandwich is too tight, so I just got in the habit of kind of taping it on the inside if I'm not using those little inside parts, although you could certainly save them for another card if you wanted to. I'm just going to use the frame that is left behind by this image, and I'm actually going to take a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock that is the same size and tuck that underneath, and then I'm going to bring in my Distress Oxide inks, starting with that picked raspberry. I lined that up with that frame to make sure that my ink is right in the center of it, but then I removed it to blend that out so that I can make sure that it is not getting on the outer frame. So I just wanted to blend that out a little bit more, add a little extra depth to that, so I did go back in with some more color, and then I'll just pop the frame back over top to switch to the second shade, which is going to be the Salvage Patina. So I'll add that on using the frame as the guide for the center, and then remove it to blend that out. And just make sure that I stop before I hit the pink. And I went in with a little extra color on that one as well, and then I'll repeat the same process for the Twisted Citron. Just dabbing that color in the center and then removing the frame to blend that out. Then I'm going to spritz some water onto an acrylic block. Add that with a thin paintbrush and just splatter that all over the background by tapping that on the edge of the block. That water is going to react with those Distress Oxide inks and start to lift some of that color. So I'll let that soak in for a few seconds and then blot that up with a paper towel. And there you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I felt like I needed a little bit more on the blue, so I'll just go in with a little bit of extra water on that one and blot that back up again. And then I wanted to start doing some splatter of the other shades over top. So I'm going to do the picked raspberry first. I'll splatter that mainly in the pink section, but I'm letting that go into the other sections as well. And then I also want some splatter on my white frame, so I'll bring that in and just tap some of that ink on there as well. Then I'm going to clean off that block and switch to the Salvage Patina, and repeat that same process. Just add some water and tap that all over the background, and then also onto the frame to add a little bit of color to that. And then I will switch to the Twisted Citron and do the same process once again. So this was kind of a fun and different background. I've never done a background like this before, but I really liked how it turned out. I think it was really fun. It almost reminds me of like confetti. Since this is going to be a birthday card, I thought it suited the theme pretty well. So I did decide that I didn't get quite enough pink down in the bottom corner where the green is, so I just went back to that picked raspberry and added a little extra of that down at the bottom. And I wanted to add a little bit extra to the frame as well. So I'm just going to bring that in, and then I will set both of these panels aside to dry. And in the meantime, I am going to work on my sentiment. So I'm just going to use the rest of that cardstock panel, and I'm going to stamp out Happy Purrrthday in plastic flamingo ink from Lawn Fawn. And I did stamp that down a couple of times to make sure I had a nice impression. And then I'm going to do an insert for the inside of the card because my card base is going to be a super vibrant shade. So I'm going to do just plain white cardstock that I've trimmed down to 4 by 5 1/4. And I took a sentiment from the birthday script stamped set and then another cat from the 9 Lives. So now I have added a ton of foam tape to the back of that frame. I wanted to make sure that it was really well supported. And I'm just going to use my Twiddler's Nook embellishment tray to put all of my little release papers in there so that I can just dump the whole thing in the trash when I'm done. But I just cut down that Scotch 3M foam tape into little strips for the edges, and then I use some bigger strips as needed. So once I have that all peeled off, I'm going to line that up over those ink spots, make sure those are straight in the frame, and then pop that down into place. My card base is made from MFT Ripe Raspberry cardstock, and this is one where I accidentally stamped my little handmade by stamp with all of my blog and YouTube channel information. I stamped that down incorrectly, so I just flipped the card over, and since this focal panel is covering that card front completely, nobody but you guys will ever know, and I didn't have to waste a card base. So then I will take that little insert and just glue that on the inside so we have a nice little frame around the edges. And then I can bring in my images. Before I adhere those, I wanted to add my sentiment. I just trimmed that down into a strip, and I'm going to glue that down on the right hand side and then trim off the excess with my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. And then I'll start bringing in my images. And I have added some foam tape to the back of all of the kitties. So I'm going to pop the little tiger kitten down in the bottom green circle. Just making sure I have him right where I want him. And then the little patch kitten I'm going to add in the blue circle, leaving some room down in front for that extra ball of yarn in just a little bit. And then the black kitty I'm going to put in the pink circle. And I had some foam tape on her tail, but I removed that and just added liquid glue because her tail is going to overlap the outer part of the frame. And I could see that there was a little bit of foam tape peeking out or on the right side there. So I just trimmed that out with my scissors as well and peeled that out so that you couldn't see any of that. I hadn't added any foam tape to the accessory images because I wasn't sure yet if any of them were going to overlap the kittens or overlap the frame. But once I realized that that was not going to be an issue, I could go ahead and add a little bit of foam tape behind them. For the mouse, I decided to peel that up and just add a little liquid glue to the tail so that it would lay flat on that frame. And then I'm going to add the yarn ball in the blue square, like I said, with the other kitten. So I'm just adding foam tape to support that, trimming that down to fit, and then the extra little piece worked perfectly behind the little fish toy. So I'm going to add that down with the tiger striped cat. And then, like I said, the yarn will go in the larger blue circle with the cat that's laying on his back holding the other ball of yarn. But I just kind of played with it for a little bit to kind of figure out the direction that I wanted it to go. I wasn't sure which way I wanted it to lay. I knew that I kind of wanted it to overlap the outer part of the frame, just like the mouse's tail. So I ended up sticking it down towards the lower right side. Then I wanted to add a little bit of extra embellishment because there was so much white space, which I'm not used to on my cards. I usually have a lot of color. So I decided to fill in some of that white space with some sparkling clear sequins, and I just used 3 different sizes from the mix and glued those down using my Studio Katia embellishment wand. I let those dry for a little bit, and then I'm going to fill the centers with some Stardust Stickles for some extra shimmer and shine. And mine's getting a little thick on me, so I'm just being careful to kind of swirl it as I lift up. If it's starting to blob to one side, that kind of keeps it even and centered. I also did add a little tiny bit of Stardust Stickles on the bottom of the accessory images, including the yarn that the cat is holding, and then also the little ribbon for the black cat since I didn't want to put glitter on the mouse. But that is going to finish off this card, so I'll lift that up so you can see all of that sparkle and detail and give you another peek at the inside as well. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. These cat images are so darling and I had so much fun playing with them. I can't wait to use even more of them. There's so many more kitties that I didn't even get to for this one. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and of course check out the links down in the description box if you'd like to pick up any of these products for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.